Mississippi, 1878. The thick fog enveloped the swamps like a shroud as Dr. Elias Montgomery descended from the carriage in Oak Ridge, a village forgotten by time. The young doctor adjusted his coat against the damp autumn chill, observing the faded wooden houses and suspicious glances from the few residents who ventured onto the muddy streets. "You shouldn't have come, doctor," muttered the coachman, an elderly man with eyes that had witnessed more than they cared to. "Nothing good comes from those parts." Elias ignored the warning. After years at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, where he had witnessed the most promising scientific advances of the era, the young doctor was determined to investigate the rumors that reached Baltimore about a mysterious disease plaguing the region. Or at least, that's what he told himself. The truth was more complex. His mentor, Dr. Harrison, had received an anonymous letter mentioning revolutionary medical experiments conducted by a certain Dr. Dunleith. Intrigued and skeptical, Harrison had sent Elias to investigate. "I'm looking for information about the Dunleith property," Elias announced as he entered the village's only tavern. The silence that followed was oppressive. Conversation ceased, whiskey mugs paused in midair, and gazes turned away. Only the barman, a burly man with scars on his face, maintained eye contact. "We have nothing to say about that place," he replied dryly. "And if you have any sense, doctor, you'll go back where you came from before nightfall." An elderly woman sitting alone in a dark corner rose with difficulty. Her wrinkled face contrasted with surprisingly vivid eyes. "My grandson," she said with a trembling voice, "disappeared 3 months ago. Went to work at the Dunleith property. Never came back." Other accounts began to emerge, as if a dam had broken. Disappearances, nocturnal screams echoing through the forest, strange lights in the windows of the abandoned mansion, carriages arriving in the dead of night, loaded with long crates. "They say old Dunleith died years ago," commented a woodcutter, "but the smoke never stopped coming from the chimneys." Elias recorded everything in his notebook, his scientific skepticism gradually giving way to unease. When he asked about the way to the property, no one offered to guide him. "Follow the north road for 5 miles, the barman finally said. "Where the crows gather over the dead oaks, turn left. But remember, doctor, those who seek the Dunleiths end up finding more than they bargained for." That night, lodged in the only available room above the tavern, Elias was awakened by soft knocks on his door. Upon opening it, he found only a small cloth bundle. Inside was a rusty scalpel and a yellowed piece of paper with a single phrase written in elegant calligraphy: "Some secrets should remain buried." Through the window, Elias glimpsed a hooded figure disappearing into the mist. Sleep did not return that night as the young doctor contemplated the scalpel by the light of a flickering candle. On the oxidized blade, it was still possible to discern an engraved symbol, an eye inside a triangle. The same symbol he had seen on the wax seal of the anonymous letter sent to Dr. Harrison. The road to the Dunleith property wound through increasingly dense swamps and forests. Elias had rented a reluctant horse, the only one the local stable had agreed to provide for the journey. As he advanced, the vegetation seemed to change character. The oaks and magnolias gave way to twisted cypresses and moss-covered trees that hung like skeletal fingers. Ravens observed his passage with black, impassive eyes. Exactly as the barman had described, a group of them perched on dead trees at the fork in the road. Elias turned left, onto a path almost swallowed by vegetation. The air became heavier with each meter traveled. It wasn't just the swamp humidity. There was something else, an underlying odor that the doctor couldn't completely identify. Something chemical, reminiscent of university laboratories, but mixed with something more organic. After almost 2 hours of riding, the forest opened into a wide clearing. In the center stood the Dunleith mansion. The building was an impressive 3-story neoclassical structure, with imposing columns supporting a front veranda. However, what could have been a majestic residence was now in a state of partial decay. The white paint was peeling, revealing darkened wood beneath. Some windows were broken, others covered with boards. An entire wing appeared to have suffered a fire years ago. Still, signs of occupation were evident. Smoke rose from one of the chimneys, and Elias noticed recent footprints in the mud of the main path. Tying his horse to a nearby tree, the doctor cautiously approached. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the wind in the leaves, as if nature itself avoided this place. At the foot of the main staircase, Elias hesitated. His instinct screamed for him to return to Oakridge, but his scientific curiosity, and something else, a compulsion he couldn't explain, drove him forward. Before he could knock, the door opened with a prolonged creak. "Dr. Montgomery, I presume." The voice was soft, educated, with a slight accent that Elias couldn't identify. "We've been expecting you." The man at the door was tall and thin, with impeccably combed grey hair. He wore a formal black suit that seemed a decade or two out of date. His pale face displayed aristocratic features, but his eyes were of such a light blue that they seemed almost transparent. How do you know my name?" stammered Elias, disconcerted. A thin smile spread across the man's face. "I am Edmund Dunleith. My brother, Dr. Thaddeus Dunleith, corresponds with colleagues in various medical institutions. Your mentor, Dr. Harrison, is quite respected in our circles." Elias felt a chill. No one besides Harrison knew of his mission. "Please, come in," continued Edmund, stepping away from the door. "My brother will be delighted to discuss his medical advances with such a promising colleague." The interior of the mansion was a study in contrasts. The entrance hall, with its marble floor and imposing staircase, spoke of wealth and refinement from a bygone era. But Elias immediately noticed the signs of neglect: layers of dust in the corners, tapestries stained with moisture, and a persistent odor of mold and chemicals. "My brother is in his laboratory at the moment," explained Edmund, leading Elias through corridors decorated with portraits of stern-faced people, presumably Dunleith ancestors. "He rarely emerges when in the midst of a procedure. In the meantime, allow me to show you to your quarters." "My quarters?" questioned Elias. "I didn't mention planning to stay." Edmund stopped, turning slowly. Those almost transparent eyes studied Elias with disturbing intensity. "Why, Doctor? The Dunleith property is hours from any civilization, and the paths are dangerous after nightfall. Surely you didn't expect to make the return journey today?" Something in the way Edmund pronounced dangerous made Elias reconsider his position. "Of course, I appreciate your hospitality." Edmund led him to a room on the second floor. The chamber was spacious, with a canopy bed and antique but well-preserved furniture. A large window offered a view of the back of the property, where Elias glimpsed a family cemetery surrounded by cypresses. "Dinner will be served at 7, informed Edmund. "Until then, feel free to rest. He made a significant pause. "Please restrict yourself to this room and the common areas of the first floor. Certain parts of the house are not safe due to their state of deterioration." After Edmund's departure, Elias examined the room thoroughly. Under the bed, he found deep scratches in the floorboards. In the wardrobe, marks that appeared to have been made by human fingernails on the inner wood. And more disturbing, upon testing the door lock, he discovered it could only be locked from the outside. Approaching the window, Elias observed the cemetery more carefully. Among the ancient tombs, he noticed something alarming: a section with at least a dozen recent graves, the earth still dark and without vegetation. As he contemplated this discovery, a movement caught his attention. A female figure in a white dress walked among the tombstones, placing wildflowers on one of the new graves. As if sensing his gaze, she raised her face toward the window. Even at a distance, Elias could see she was young and ethereally beautiful, with long black hair, contrasting with the paleness of her skin. Her eyes met his for a moment, And then, with an almost imperceptible gesture, she brought her finger to her lips in a sign of silence. The next instant, Edmund appeared in the cemetery, approaching the young woman with rigid steps. Elias retreated from the window, but not before seeing the man grab the girl's arm with visible force, dragging her back to the mansion. At that moment, a muffled scream echoed from somewhere below Elias's room, a sound of such deep and desperate pain that it made his blood freeze. The scream was quickly silenced, followed by the metallic sound of instruments being handled. Elias looked at his suitcase, where he had stored a revolver he had brought as a precaution. Now he questioned whether it would be sufficient to face the horrors he was beginning to suspect existed in the Dunleith mansion. Dinner was served punctually at 7 in an opulent dining room, illuminated by a crystal chandelier that cast dancing shadows over the polished mahogany table. Edmund Dunleith occupied one end, while Elias was directed to the opposite side. The long distance between them, with 12 empty chairs in between, created an atmosphere of deliberate isolation. "My brother regrets not being able to join us," announced Edmund, as an elderly and silent woman, introduced only as Mrs. Winters, served a soup of appetizing appearance. "His experiments have reached a critical phase that requires constant monitoring." "What exactly is the nature of these experiments?" asked Elias, trying to maintain a casual tone as he tasted the soup. Despite his apprehension, he was famished after the long journey. Edmund smiled, that same thin smile that didn't reach his translucent eyes. "Thaddeus has always been a visionary. While most doctors are content to treat symptoms, my brother seeks something much more fundamental, understanding human consciousness itself." "A fascinating field," commented Elias. "At the university, we debated extensively about the physical location of consciousness in the brain." But Thaddeus has gone beyond those sterile academic discussions." Edmund made a broad gesture with his hand. "He doesn't theorize. He experiments. He observes. He modifies." The choice of word made Elias pause with the spoon halfway to his mouth. "Modifies? The human mind is malleable, Dr. Montgomery. Under the right conditions, it can be reshaped. Memories can be reallocated. Personalities altered. The very perception of reality can be fundamentally transformed." Mrs. Winters removed the soup plates and served the main course, a delicious-looking roast, accompanied by vegetables grown on the property, according to Edmund. Elias noticed that the elderly woman had marks of old burns on her hands and a vacant look, as if she were present only in body. "And who are the subjects of these experiments?" asked Elias, keeping his voice steady. Edmund cut a piece of meat with meticulous precision. "Volunteers mainly, people without prospects, without families, without anyone to miss them. We offer shelter, food, and purpose. In exchange, they contribute to the advancement of science." "Volunteers like the grandson of the lady in Oakridge? Or the people buried in those recent graves I saw from the window?" The silence that followed was cutting. Edmund set down his cutlery slowly, studying Elias with new interest. "I see you are observant, Doctor. An admirable quality in a scientist." He took a sip of wine. "The deaths are regrettable, but inevitable on the path of progress. Each failure brings us closer to success." "And the young woman in the cemetery, is she also a volunteer?" A shadow crossed Edmund's face. "My niece, Cordelia. Thaddeus's daughter. She suffers from a nervous condition that makes her unstable. Pay no attention to her delusions should you encounter her." The rest of dinner proceeded with superficial conversation about medicine and the history of the Dunleith family. Edmund revealed that the property had existed since before the Civil War, when the family had grown rich from the cotton trade and later from investments in railroads. "The Dunleiths have always been pioneers," he stated with evident pride. "Our father was one of the first to experiment with anesthesia in the South. Our grandfather performed organ transplants decades before they were considered possible." After dessert, a surprisingly delicious apple pie, Edmund announced that he had matters to attend to and that Elias should return to his room. Tomorrow, if my brother is available, perhaps you can visit the laboratory. Until then, remember my warning about the restricted areas of the house. Back in his room, Elias found his suitcase had been rifled through. The revolver had disappeared, as had his notebook. The door, as he had suspected, was locked from the outside as soon as he entered. Determined not to remain a prisoner, Elias examined the room meticulously. He tested the floorboards, searched for secret passages in the walls, and finally discovered that one of the decorative panels near the fireplace was loose. Carefully removing it, he found a narrow space, a service corridor built into the wall. Taking a deep breath, Elias entered the claustrophobic space, illuminated only by the candle he had brought from the room. The narrow corridor wound between the walls of the mansion, occasionally opening into junctions that offered choices of direction. Guided by instinct and the logic of the house's architecture, Elias advanced slowly, occasionally stopping to listen. At one point he heard muffled voices. Approaching a small opening in the wall, probably an air vent, he could spy what appeared to be Edmund's office. The man was seated at a desk, speaking with Mrs. Winters. Suspicious behavior. "We should not underestimate him," Edmund was saying. "Increase the dose in his breakfast. Thaddeus wants to examine him before the main procedure." "Yes, sir," replied Mrs. Winters, her voice surprisingly firm compared to her fragile appearance. "And what about the girl? She was seen again in the cemetery. Lock her in the attic. No food this time. She needs to learn." Elias continued his exploration, descending a narrow staircase that he presumed led to the basement. The chemical odor he had noticed before grew stronger, now mixed with a metallic smell that he instantly recognized from his days in the hospital. Blood. The corridor ended at a small opening covered by a grate. Through it, Elias glimpsed an extensive laboratory, illuminated by gas lamps and electrical equipment, a rarity in that remote region. What he saw beyond made his stomach turn. Surgical tables occupied the center of the space, each containing a body. Some were covered with sheets, others exposed, with incisions open and instruments still inserted. On one of the tables, a man was clearly conscious, his eyes open in absolute terror, his mouth gagged, his body immobilized by straps. Moving between the tables was a man who could only be Dr. Thaddeus Dunleith. Older than Edmund, with disheveled white hair and a stooped posture, he worked with the methodical precision of a watchmaker, adjusting equipment connected to the open skull of one of the patients. Subject 27 demonstrates positive response to temporal lobe stimulation, Thaddeus dictated to a phonograph. When stimulated, he recites memories that are not his, specifically the memories of subject 14, deceased 3 weeks ago. The transfer appears to have been partially successful. Elias involuntarily recoiled, bumping against the wall. The sound, though slight, was enough to alert Thaddeus, who abruptly raised his head. "Edmund, is that you?" he called, looking toward the grate. Elias remained motionless, barely breathing. After a tense moment, Thaddeus returned to his work, muttering to himself. Deciding he had seen enough, Elias began to retreat through the corridor. He needed to escape, seek help, expose the horrors occurring in the Dunleith mansion. As he turned a corner, he collided with a figure in the dark. Before he could scream, a delicate hand covered his mouth. "Silence, if you want to live," whispered a female voice. "Come with me, quickly." It was Cordelia, the young woman from the cemetery. Her eyes, visible even in the dim light, conveyed urgency and fear. Without alternatives, Elias followed her through the hidden labyrinths of the Dunleith mansion. Cordelia guided Elias through a network of hidden passages that seemed to form a parallel nervous system within the walls of the mansion. They moved in silence, communicating only through gestures, until they emerged in a small attic in the east wing, an area that seemed to have been abandoned for years. The space was surprisingly cozy, a simple bed, shelves with books, a small table with a chair, and a circular window that offered a view of the distant swamps. Strategically placed candles illuminated the environment with a soft glow. "My refuge," explained Cordelia in a low voice, locking the door with a key she kept in her dress pocket. "The only place in the house they don't know about. I found it as a child and kept it secret." In the candlelight, Elias could observe her better. Cordelia Dunleith was about 20 years old, with an ethereal beauty marked by dark, deep eyes that contrasted with her pale skin. Her movements were graceful but cautious, like those of a wild animal accustomed to fleeing. "You saw the laboratory," she said. It wasn't a question. Elias nodded, still processing the horrors he had witnessed. "Your father, what he's doing down there is monstrous." A sad smile touched Cordelia's lips. "Thaddeus Dunleith is not my father." She approached a small dresser from which she retrieved a locket. Opening it, she showed Elias the miniature of a young and beautiful woman with features similar to her own. "My mother, Eleanor. She was a nurse at the Natchez Hospital. She met Thaddeus when he was still practicing conventional medicine. They fell in love, married, and she came to live here." Cordelia closed the locket carefully. "That was 22 years ago. She died in childbirth." "I'm sorry," murmured Elias. "Don't be. She was spared what would come after." Cordelia sat on the edge of the bed, indicating the chair for Elias. After her death, something changed in Thaddeus. His obsession with death and the boundaries between body and mind intensified. He abandoned his medical practice and isolated himself here, converting the basement into a laboratory. "And your Uncle Edmund?" "Edmund has always been the facilitator, the practical brother who dealt with the outside world, obtaining supplies, equipment, and eventually subjects for the experiments." Cordelia rose abruptly, walking to the window. The moonlight illuminated her profile, revealing a thin scar that ran from her temple to her neck. A surgical mark, Elias recognized. "At first, they used only cadavers," she continued. "Unclaimed bodies from hospitals, indigents, executed criminals. But soon that wasn't enough. Thaddeus needed living subjects for his experiments on consciousness. The disappearances in Oakridge," concluded Elias, "and in other villages within a 50-mile radius. Itinerant workers, prostitutes, drunkards, anyone who could disappear without causing alarm." She turned to face him. "But you already know that. What you don't know is the ultimate goal." Elias waited as Cordelia seemed to gather courage. "Thaddeus believes he has discovered a method to transfer the consciousness of one person to another. Not just memories or personality traits, but the complete essence of being." "That's impossible," protested Elias, his medical skepticism momentarily overriding the horror. "Tell that to the dozens who have died on his tables." Cordelia's voice trembled. He began with simple transfers, making one subject experience the memories of another through electrical stimulation and chemicals. Then he tried to preserve consciousnesses in special containers, using a solution he developed. She pointed to a shelf where several notebooks were stacked. "I've documented everything I could over the years. Each experiment, each victim, someone needed to record their names, their stories." Elias leafed through one of the notebooks, finding pages of meticulous notes, drawings of surgical procedures, and lists of names with dates. "Why do you remain here?" he finally asked. "Why haven't you fled?" Cordelia's gaze hardened. "I tried 3 times. The last time I made it as far as New Orleans." She pushed back her hair, fully revealing the scar. "This was my punishment. Thaddeus removed part of my frontal lobe, enough to make me more compliant, but not so much that it would impair my cognitive functions. He considers me an ongoing experiment." Elias felt nausea at imagining the procedure performed on the young woman before him. "There's more," continued Cordelia, her voice now almost a whisper. "In recent months, Thaddeus has become obsessed with a new goal. He doesn't just want to transfer consciousnesses, he wants to achieve immortality." "How?" by transferring his own consciousness to a younger, healthier body. She looked directly into Elias's eyes. A body like yours, Doctor. The revelation hit Elias like a physical blow. Is that why I was lured here? A trap? Not exactly. Thaddeus has been monitoring your work for some time. Your research on brain trauma caught his attention. He believes your skills can help him perfect the final procedure. Cordelia hesitated. But yes, eventually your body would be requisitioned. I need to get out of here, declared Elias, standing up. And you should come with me. Cordelia sadly shook her head. There is no easy way out. The property is guarded. There are armed men patrolling the boundaries, former patients whose minds have been altered to serve the Dunleiths. There must be a way. Perhaps there is. And Cordelia approached, holding Elias's hands with surprising intensity. But first, you need to fully understand what we're fighting against. You need to see the Hall of Consciousnesses. What? Thaddeus's true work. Not just the experiments in the laboratory, but their result. She consulted a small pocket watch. It's almost midnight. Thaddeus will be in his room now, resting before resuming the experiments at dawn. We can go through the tunnel that connects the main house to the old barn. Elias hesitated, torn between the desire to flee immediately and the need to fully understand the horrors of the Dunleith mansion. If we want to stop them, argued Cordelia, we need evidence. We need to document everything. Finally, Elias nodded. Show me. Cordelia extinguished all the candles except one, which she placed in a hand lantern. Moving a bookshelf, she revealed a small door that opened to a narrow staircase. Stay close, she instructed. And if we hear anything, we run, completed Elias. They descended in silence, the small flame of the lantern casting grotesque shadows on the stone walls. The air became colder and damper as they descended, carrying an odor that Elias couldn't completely identify, something between preservation chemicals and the sweet, nauseating smell of decomposition. At the foot of the stairs, Cordelia paused before a heavy metal door. Her hands trembled slightly as she inserted a key into the lock. What we will see in there, she whispered, will forever change your understanding of life and death. The door opened with a metallic groan, revealing a darkness that the small lantern could barely penetrate. Thaddeus Dunleith's laboratory was a chamber of horrors disguised as a scientific facility. Elias, firmly tied to a metal chair, observed the space with a mixture of revulsion and professional fascination. The equipment was a bizarre combination of modern technology and antiquated apparatus. Electrical generators hummed alongside Victorian surgical instruments. Test tubes bubbling with colored liquids shared space with jars containing preserved specimens of human anatomy. The smell was a nauseating mixture of chemicals, antiseptics, and the unmistakable metallic odor of blood. Impressive, isn't it? Thaddeus emerged from an adjacent room, now dressed in a stained surgical apron over his clothes. His hands, Elias noticed, were impeccably clean, the nails cut with surgical precision. I built all this over decades. Some equipment came from Europe, others I designed myself. Elias discreetly tested his restraints. Reinforced leather straps with metal buckles attached to a chair bolted to the floor. There was no immediate possibility of escape. Why show me all this, he asked, trying to buy time. If you intend to use me as a subject, why reveal your secrets? Thaddeus smiled, approaching with a syringe. Because you are not just another subject, Dr. Montgomery. You are a colleague, a man of science. I want you to understand, no, to appreciate the magnitude of what I am accomplishing here. He injected the contents of the syringe into Elias's arm before he could protest. Just a mild sedative. We need you to remain conscious but cooperative. Almost immediately, Elias felt a sensation of weight in his limbs, as if they were wrapped in cotton. His mind, however, remained clear, perhaps even sharper, with colors and sounds acquiring a hyper-real quality. Perfect, murmured Thaddeus, checking Elias's pupils with a small flashlight. Now we can talk in a civilized manner. Edmund entered the laboratory, bringing a tray with freshly sterilized surgical instruments. Everything is ready, brother. The preparations for the main procedure are underway. Excellent. Thaddeus picked up an instrument that looked like a combination of compass and drill. Do you know what this is, Dr. Montgomery? Elias focused on the object with difficulty. A modified tripan. Very good. Used by the ancient Egyptians to access the brain. Of course, my version is considerably more refined. Thaddeus placed the instrument back on the tray. But that will be for later. First, we need to assess your compatibility. Compatibility as a vessel, explained Thaddeus patiently, like a teacher to a promising student. Not all bodies are suitable for receiving a transferred consciousness. It requires a certain neurological balance. Edmund approached with another tray, this one containing several vials with the amber solution that Elias had seen in the Hall of Consciousnesses. These are my preliminary tests, continued Thaddeus. Small transfers to evaluate how your brain responds, nothing permanent, I assure you. Elias tried to pull away, but the restraints and the sedative made any significant movement impossible. This is madness, he protested, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. Even if you could transfer consciousnesses, what would you gain from it? Eventually, the new body would age too. Thaddeus smiled, a gesture that illuminated his face with an almost childlike enthusiasm. Ah, but that's the beauty of my plan. It's not just about one transfer, but a continuous cycle. Every few decades, a new transfer, effective immortality. At the cost of countless innocent lives, accused Elias. Necessary sacrifices for the greater good, replied Thaddeus, dismissing the objection with a gesture. Think of the possibilities. Brilliant minds like Newton, Darwin, Pasteur, lost forever due to the fragility of the body. Imagine if we could preserve such intellects indefinitely, allowing them to continue their discoveries for centuries. As he spoke, Thaddeus prepared a complex apparatus, a kind of metal helmet connected to wires and tubes. Edmund adjusted dials and switches on a nearby control panel. Of course, continued Thaddeus, initially I will be the only beneficiary. I need to perfect the process before expanding its use. But eventually, it could be offered to others who deserve such a gift. And who decides who deserves it? Challenged Elias, fighting against the effect of the sedative. Men of vision, men like me. Thaddeus positioned the helmet over Elias's head. Now relax. The first phase is relatively painless. An electrical hum filled the air as Edmund activated the equipment. Elias felt a strange sensation, as if thousands of microscopic ants were crawling across his scalp, penetrating to his brain. Fascinating, murmured Thaddeus, observing a dial that registered some kind of reading. Your neurological pattern is exceptionally stable. I rarely see such balance between the cerebral hemispheres. He adjusted a control, and Elias felt a sharp pain, like a needle penetrating deeply into his mind. Images began to flash before his eyes, memories but not his own. He saw himself walking streets of a city he had never visited, conversing with people he didn't know, performing actions he had never executed. The subject is responding to the memory transfer from batch 17, reported Edmund, consulting a notebook. A merchant from New Orleans, if I'm not mistaken. Excellent receptivity, agreed Thaddeus. Increased to level 3. The intensity of the images increased. Now Elias not only saw the foreign memories, he felt them, as if they were his own. He could feel the heat of the New Orleans sun, the taste of strong coffee taken at a riverside cafe, the love for a dark-haired woman named Marie. Almost perfect integration, observed Thaddeus with evident satisfaction. Your brain isn't just receiving the memories, but incorporating them into your own neural patterns. Through the fog of invasive memories and growing pain, Elias realized what was happening. Thaddeus wasn't just testing. He was beginning the process of erasing his identity, preparing his brain to receive a new consciousness. With a supreme effort, he concentrated on his own memories. His childhood in Baltimore, his parents, his years in medical school, his oath to do no harm. "Interesting," commented Thaddeus, noting the change in the dials. "He's resisting, consciously reinforcing his own neural patterns. Should we increase the power?" asked Edmund. Thaddeus considered for a moment. "No. That could damage structures we need to preserve. Besides, this resistance is intriguing. It suggests exceptional willpower." He smiled at Elias. "This only confirms that I chose well. A strong vessel for a strong mind." He turned off the equipment, and the strange memories gradually faded. Elias was left panting, sweating profusely despite the cold of the laboratory. "A productive session," declared Thaddeus, removing the helmet. "Tomorrow we will continue with more advanced tests. The main procedure is scheduled for the night of the new moon, 3 days from now. Sufficient time for adequate preparations." He gestured to Edmund. "Take him back to his room. Make sure he receives adequate nourishment. We need him in optimal physical condition." "And what about the girl?" asked Edmund. "Leave her in isolation for now. I'll deal with her after the main procedure." Thaddeus's face hardened. "She has become an unnecessary complication. Perhaps it's time to consider a more productive use for her." As the guards untied him from the chair, Elias realized with horror what Thaddeus was implying. Cordelia, who had spent her entire life under the terror of these men, now faced the prospect of becoming just another subject in their macabre experiments. Taken back to his room, Elias was unceremoniously thrown onto the bed. The door was locked and heavy footsteps retreated down the corridor. The sedative still circulated in his system, making his movements slow and awkward, but his mind worked frantically. 3 days. He had 3 days to find a way to escape, rescue Cordelia, and expose the horrors of the Dunleith mansion to the world. Otherwise, his consciousness would be erased forever, replaced by the sick mind of Thaddeus Dunleith. As he fought against the drug-induced sleep, Elias vowed that he would not allow this to happen. Somehow, he would find a way to stop the Dunleith brothers and their reign of scientific terror.